She said it in a parking lot, in the rain, with the engine running and her hand still on the wheel. Not looking at me. Looking straight ahead at the row of headstones going gray in the November drizzle. "Don't tell her I said this," she said. "But she's been different since you came back." I didn't answer right away. I was still in the particular daze of a man who has stood at a graveside for 40 minutes, watching dirt get moved and trying to remember how to breathe at a normal rate. I was also sitting in the passenger seat of Carol Dempsey's navy blue station wagon, wearing a borrowed black tie, and beginning to understand that the drive home was going to be something other than a drive home. "Different how?" I said. She looked at me then. And the thing about Carol Dempsey, the thing I had known since I was 12 years old, and she was the mother who let us eat cereal for dinner and asked us real questions and genuinely meant it when she listened to the answers, is that she had never once in her life said anything she didn't mean to say. "Different like herself again," she said. That's how. That sentence did something quiet to the room. There was no room. We were in a car park in November with the rain coming down. It did something quiet anyway. My name is Owen Caffrey. I'm 36. I do building surveying, which means I spend a significant portion of my professional life telling people that the walls they love are doing things walls should not be doing, and they take this personally, which I understand but cannot help. I grew up in a medium-sized town called Hayford. One good pub, one bad pub. One school that manages to be all of those things simultaneously, and a community that treats other people's business as more of a suggestion than a boundary. I left Hayford at 22 for the city, and came back 7 months ago, for reasons I described at the time as professional. They were also personal in ways I hadn't finished working out. Her name is Jess Dempsey. She's 34. She teaches Year 2 primary school, which she describes as managed chaos with glitter, and she has lived in Hayford her entire life with the ease of someone who never needed to leave to find out who she was. We have been best friends since we were 11, when we were assigned a joint history project on the Roman Empire, and discovered within 10 minutes that we had identical opinions about everything, and compatible opinions about everything else. She is quick-witted and frequently impatient, and has a laugh that starts before the thing is even finished being funny. She has been my person, the one I called when things were good, and called first when things went wrong, for 23 years. The only thing I had never told her is the one thing that would have changed everything. I had built an entire internal architecture of sensible reasons for this over 2 decades, and I had been so thorough about it that I'd nearly finished believing it. Carol Dempsey is 61, widowed 7 years ago, and has spent her life taking no nonsense from anyone, including circumstances that would have stopped a less determined person entirely. She still makes Sunday lunches that require advance notice. She still has a photo on her mantelpiece of me and Jess at 13 in matching Christmas jumpers that Jess has been trying to have removed for 20 years. She knows me the way certain parents know their children's friends. Not the version you show the world, but the version that existed at 12 and 15 and hasn't fundamentally shifted since, regardless of how convincingly you've redecorated around it. She drove me to the funeral because my car was being serviced, and Jess had come separately with her aunt. She drove me home because it was raining and the bus was 40 minutes away, and she had materialized beside me in the car park in the particular way she had when she had decided something was going to happen and was simply managing the logistics until it did. The funeral was for Tom Caffrey, my father's brother. An uncle I'd loved quietly and seen infrequently, and was now going to miss in the specific way you miss people you always thought you'd get more time with. The kind of loss that doesn't knock you flat so much as it tilts the floor slightly and leaves you recalibrating. I had stood at the graveside thinking about time in the way you only do when someone who seemed to have plenty of it has unexpectedly run out. I was still thinking about time when Carol said what she said. She didn't elaborate immediately. That was her way. She said the significant thing, and then let it sit, the way a teacher does, giving you room to catch up, rather than rushing to the answer. I had spent 20 years appreciating this quality of hers in theory and finding it deeply uncomfortable in practice. She put the car in gear and pulled out of the car park with the quiet authority of a woman who has spent 60 years being right about things. The rain on the windscreen, the wipers, Hayford going past in the gray of an afternoon that had committed entirely to itself. "Jess talks about you," she said. "Not an accusation, just information. She always did. The whole time you were in the city. But it's different now you're actually here. There's an ease in her." She paused, looking for the word the way Jess did too. This was clearly hereditary. "There's an ease in her that wasn't there before." "We're best friends," I said. Which was true. And also, I could hear as the words came out of my mouth, not quite the point. Carol did not dignify this with a response. She glanced at me once, briefly, with the expression she used when I was 17, and it said something that revealed I wasn't as clever as I thought I was. We drove for 3 minutes in silence. "She missed you," Carol said. "I'm not telling you something she'd be embarrassed by. She'd say the same herself. She just wouldn't say all of it." "All of what?" She looked over at me. "All of the part," she said, "where it isn't only about friendship." The lavender smell of the hand cream she'd always kept in the glove box. The rain easing slightly, and then returning. I looked out the window and thought about the 7 months since I'd come back to Hayford. The way Jess had been at the station when my train arrived, standing on the platform with a coffee she'd bought me, and a fully formed opinion about my luggage before I'd even cleared the barriers. The way we'd fallen back into each other with no adjustment period at all. No recalibration. As if the 12 years I'd been away had just been a very long Tuesday, and we were simply resuming. The way she showed up at my flat unannounced with food when she knew I was working late, and had let herself in with the spare key I'd given her in the 3rd week, and apparently neither of us had reconsidered since. I had been explaining all of this to myself as friendship for 7 months, with the dedication of a man who has decided the evidence doesn't mean what it quite plainly looks like it means. But there were things I hadn't managed to fully explain away. There was the Wednesday 6 weeks ago when I'd had a call that went badly, a surveying report that had a significant error, one that wasn't technically my fault but was going to require 3 days of correction and 2 difficult conversations. And I hadn't texted or called anyone. I just sat in my car in the firm's car park for a few minutes, and then I'd driven to Jess's school and parked and waited for the end-of-day bell, and when she came out with her bag and her coat half done up and saw me leaning against the car, she'd stopped walking and looked at me and said what happened before I'd said a word. She'd taken me to the pub. Not the bad one. She'd listened without interrupting, which she was bad at except when she was being deliberate about it, which meant she knew I needed it. When I'd finished, she'd said, "Right. So 3 days of correction and 2 difficult conversations. Which one do you want to do first?" And that had been it. That was what she did. She took the thing that felt large and made it a sequence of manageable steps, and she did it so matter-of-factly that you felt like an idiot for having been in your car for 10 minutes. I drove home that night thinking about the number of times over 23 years she'd done some version of that, and the number of times I'd done it for her, and how that particular exchange had always felt less like what friendship does, and more like what you do for the person you're building a life around. And I'd gotten home and poured a glass of water and stood in my kitchen and said to myself, "This is not a new thought, Owen. You know this is not a new thought." Then there was her phone. 3 weeks ago, her phone had been on my kitchen table when a message came in. She'd been in the other room. She'd called out, "That'll be for me," and come through and reached across me to pick it up, and in the half-second she opened the contact to reply I'd seen the name she'd saved me under. Not Owen. Not Owen C. Not Owen, you absolute idiot, which had been my contact name since 2009, and which I'd always privately thought was affectionate in the specific way her insults were. Home? I'd thought about that word for 3 weeks and put it in the category of things I might be misinterpreting, because the alternative required me to stop misinterpreting everything else as well, and that was a significant amount of structural renovation. She changed my name in her phone, I said. Carol Dempsey did not look surprised. She pulled up outside my building and put the car in park and said, "When did you see that?" 3 weeks ago. By accident. And what have you done with that information? I've been, I said, thinking about it. For 3 weeks. Yes, she looked at me with the expression of a woman who has been patient about something for considerably longer than 3 weeks and is being charitable about it. Owen, she said, you are a very intelligent man. Thank you. That was not entirely a compliment. The rain had settled into a steady, quiet sound on the roof of the car. Somewhere down the street, a van was reversing. There's a girl in Jess's class, Carol said. She hid her reading book under the bathroom sink for 6 weeks rather than say she was struggling. She had developed 11 separate strategies to manage the situation without addressing it. Jess found it one of the most creative avoidance operations she had encountered in 15 years of teaching. A brief pause. She said so to me on the phone. The irony was not available to her at the time. I looked at my hands. I don't want to get it wrong, I said. It came out quieter than I intended. Jess is the constant. 23 years of constant. Through everything that's changed, jobs, cities, everything, she's been the thing that hasn't. If I reach for something and it changes what we are, I don't get that back. There's no version where we go back to what we were if it doesn't work. Carol was quiet for a moment. The rain. The wiper's off now. Just the sound of it. I understand that, she said. I also think you are standing in front of an open door and telling yourself a very thorough and moving story about doorknobs. She turned to look at me. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm telling you I watched you at that graveside this morning thinking about time. And I thought someone who has known you both for a long time should point out, some things don't require more of it. They require less standing still. She reached across and put her hand on mine for a moment, the matter-of-fact way she had, not sentimental, just present, and then removed it. Don't tell her I said any of this, she said, looking straight ahead again. She'd be furious. She would, I agreed. She'd also stop hedging. She put the car back into gear, the signal that the conversation was done and I should now go inside and do something with it. Go home, Owen. Think. Don't overthink. You're constitutionally incapable of stopping it, think, so give yourself a time limit. And then consider that some doors have been open for considerably longer than you realized. I got out of the car. I stood on the pavement in the rain and did not move for a considerable amount of time, which is, admittedly, not out of character. I texted Jess that evening. Nothing significant, just that I'd gotten home. She sent back a voice note, the way she did when she was too tired to type, and her voice in my earphone was hoarse from the day, and she said she was fine, and that Gerald from the wake had attempted to explain his knee replacement to her in full chronological detail for 45 minutes, and she had genuinely weighed the option of faking her own death. And decided the paperwork wasn't worth it. And had I eaten anything, because I'd had the look earlier of a man who had forgotten that food existed as a concept. I listened to it twice. I told myself I was making sure I hadn't missed anything. I hadn't missed anything. I knew why I listened to it twice. I called her the next morning. When she picked up, she said, "If this is about the knee replacement, I'm not available before coffee," and I said it wasn't about the knee replacement. She went quiet, not the waiting kind, the listening kind, the quality of stillness she had when she was giving me space to arrive at something. "I need to tell you something," I said. "Okay," she said. "I came back here for the job," I said. "That's true. And I'd spent 12 years in a city with everything I thought I wanted, and kept having this feeling of something missing that I couldn't locate. And then I'd come back for a weekend and sit in your kitchen and feel like I could breathe properly again. And at some point I stopped being able to pretend I didn't understand what that meant." The line was quiet. I had developed a thorough and involuntary knowledge of my kitchen ceiling. "I'm not assuming anything," I said. "You can say nothing's changed and we'll get coffee and argue about the crossword, and I'll be very glad I came back for the reasons I'm allowed to say out loud. I stood at that graveside yesterday thinking about time, and it occurred to me that I didn't want to keep carrying this and saying nothing. I've said nothing for 23 years, and I don't want to stand there and say nothing for 23 more. A silence that lasted long enough that I started to make peace with having miscalculated. Then she said, "Owen." I waited. "I changed your name in my phone 4 years ago," she said. I started to change it back. And then I thought, why would I change it back? That was when I realized I was answering a question I hadn't fully let myself ask. A pause. Her voice had dropped to the register she used when she was saying the true version of something rather than the outline of it. "You should have said something sooner. You should have said something first," I said. "We're both idiots. We genuinely are," she said. "Enormous idiots. Very creative ones, apparently, but still." I sat down on my kitchen floor because this is what my body decided to do, and it seemed as good a decision as any. "Jess, yeah, I'm really glad I came back." She went quiet for a moment in the gathering kind of way, the way she did before she laughed. And then she said, quietly and without any irony in it at all, "I'm really glad you came back too." Something in me snapped into place. The quiet kind of snap, like a window latch finding its slot. Not dramatic, just right. "Your mother is going to be unbearable about this," I said. There was a pause, short, just long enough to be a decision, and she said, "What do you mean, my mother?" With the careful tone of someone who has already made a choice about how much they're admitting. "She'll figure it out," I said. "She always does." "She will," Jess agreed. And then she laughed, the one that starts early, the one that comes with its own particular quiet just before it, and she said, "She'll be completely terrible about it. No discretion whatsoever." She was right. Carol Dempsey mentioned it at Sunday lunch. She mentioned it at the school fundraiser. She mentioned it to the woman in the pharmacy in a context that was apparently entirely natural, though no one could reconstruct it afterward. She was, in terms of discretion, a committed non-participant, and she showed no sign of changing this. She also, 8 months later, produced the framed photograph of me and Jess at 13 in the matching Christmas jumpers. She'd had it enlarged and framed in a frame that matched nothing anyone owned, and presented it at dinner as something for the house, singular, without specifying whose house, in the tone of a woman who had already decided and was simply informing us of the outcome. We put it in the hallway. It is still there. Years later, when people asked how it finally happened, how two people who had been best friends for 23 years had ended up getting there, Jess said she'd understood it 4 years ago and had been waiting for me to catch up. I said I'd known longer than that, and had been building elaborate structural reasons to keep it where it was. And somewhere in a Navy station wagon on a November afternoon, a woman who never says anything she doesn't mean to say would have said, "It wasn't about the right moment. Some things don't need more time. They need less standing still." She was right. She usually was. It had probably always been Jess. It had just taken someone else's loss, and a gray afternoon, and a woman with lavender hand cream, and the specific patience of someone who has been watching two people circle something for a very long time to make it finally impossible to ignore. Nothing important had appeared out of nowhere. It had simply stopped being something I was allowed to look away from. What would you have done if someone who loved you both told you what you'd been afraid to see? And have you ever known something was true for years, but kept talking yourself around it? Not because you were wrong, but because being right felt like too much to risk. Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.